Welcome to the Nebraska Department of Education's Making It Stick Professional Development webinar series. I'm Dr. Michael Quinn, and I'll be your host for Module 9, the Glossary Mixer Strategy. Every content area has content-specific vocabulary, but do you set time aside for your students to learn and focus on the vocabulary? Does vocabulary have its own space in your lesson planning? When do you address your specific content area vocabulary? The Glossary Mixer webinar will take 35 minutes. Throughout this module, we built in some learner engagement activities to ensure your comprehension. When you see the pencil icon, you'll be asked to pause, reflect, engage, and write in your viewing guide. Feel free to stop, start, and rewind as needed. After you complete the module, we'll ask you a few quick questions to see if we've helped you meet the lesson's objectives. Let's get started. Here's our webinar's umbrella question. How can the Glossary Mixer strategy be used to support student acquisition of academic and domain-specific vocabulary? Because we want to help students learn our content's vocabulary in order to better perform within our content area, first, we'll reflect on your own process for vocabulary instruction. Second, we'll explore the elements of the Glossary Mixer strategy. Third, we will learn the process for engaging students in active manipulation of vocabulary. Then, we will learn how to structure the Glossary Mixer strategy in your content area. Finally, we will plan the implementation of the Glossary Mixer in a future unit of study. After this webinar, you'll be able to lead a Glossary Mixer strategy in your classroom. Either by yourself or in a group, let's take some time to reflect on how you learned and owned new vocabulary when you were a student. How do you best learn new vocabulary? How did you manage vocabulary acquisition during your time in school? In what ways do students acquire vocabulary? How much time do students have to use the vocabulary? How do you structure these interactions? Please pause the video for a moment and detail how your students acquire new vocabulary. How different is your students' vocabulary acquisition than yours? If you're able, share with your colleagues. Press play when you're ready to resume. Nebraska's high school writing standard, LA 10.2.2, states that students will write in multiple modes for a variety of purposes and audiences across disciplines. Our goal as teachers is to model different modes. For example, a narrative essay, newspaper article, or argumentative essay, and provide students with cross-disciplinary skills while acquiring the knowledge of the content area. In his book, Tiered Vocabulary, Tyson estimates that 80% of comprehension is dependent upon understanding vocabulary, so it is essential that our students know and understand the domain-specific vocabulary of our content areas. Before we address any specific vocabulary strategies, we need our own common vocabulary for the Glossary Mixer webinar. Take a look at these three words: domain-specific, writing modes, audience. Let's define our three terms. If you're viewing as a staff or PLC, feel free to pause the video to create common or shared definitions with your colleagues. We will delve deeper into each one of these topics as we explore the Glossary Mixer strategy. Press play when you're ready to resume. Oftentimes, as teachers, we fall back on rote strategies for domain-specific vocabulary, such as drill and kill. But the Glossary Mixer facilitates students' interaction with words in multiple ways for multiple purposes. By giving students a variety of structured tasks, it leads to an engaging learning activity where students authentically interact with words and the English language. Glossary Mixer is a way to actively learn and manipulate domain-specific vocabulary. These are the key steps of the Glossary Mixer. We will dive deeper into each element as we go. A writing mode is introduced with students using the vocabulary term in that mode. Then a second mode is selected. From there, students work with partners to complete the task for one mode. One of the main benefits of this strategy is that the prep work is straightforward and quick. You only need pre-selected writing tasks, a list of vocabulary words, and index cards. In your viewing guide, you will see this list of vocabulary terms. Please refer to this list so you can dive into the reflection head first. The topics were chosen based on Nebraska's content area standards. Of course, you'll generate your own list. We just wanted to model a few example vocabulary lists. What unit do you think each vocabulary list belongs to? Could belong to? Predict what their standard may sound like. Here are the standards we chose. For the Nebraska Math Standard 11.2.2, students will apply the operational properties when evaluating rational expressions and solving linear and quadratic equations and inequalities. For the Nebraska Science Standard 12.2.1, students will investigate and describe matter in terms of its structure, composition, and conservation. For the Nebraska Social Science Standard 12.1.1, students will analyze and evaluate the foundation, structures, and functions of the United States government as well as local, state, and international governments. For the Nebraska Art Standard 12.1.1, students will analyze and synthesize processes, techniques, and applications in media arts through the creation of media arts. As mentioned earlier, 80% of comprehension is based on vocabulary. This percent can increase in technical subjects because the vocabulary is more complex and the words are unlikely encountered outside the classroom. The key for students to successfully master domain-specific vocabulary is to interact with the word as many times as possible in meaningful ways. The use of this strategy will increase student recall of vocabulary and improve their writing. Either by yourself or in a group, let's take some time to reflect on a specific unit's complex vocabulary. Choose a unit that you're currently teaching. Which 10 to 15 vocabulary words do students need to know to gain proficiency in the unit? Which are complex enough to warrant repeated reading and detailed examination? Which vocabulary words either pose the biggest challenge or are most critical to understand for your students? Please pause the video for a moment and take a few minutes to think about a current unit. Press play when you're ready to resume. Let's get into the process. So how does one conduct a glossary mixer? Today, we'll learn one mixer process that you all can share and work with at any grade level in any content area. There may be pieces you want to adapt, or your PLC or site may want to keep it as uniform as possible. Keep in mind that the glossary mixer is one of many ways to teach vocabulary. This is a process for digging deeply into vocabulary. There would be 0 instructional minutes left if all vocabulary was taught using this method. The reflection on the previous slide is a way of sifting through the mountain of domain-specific vocabulary to determine the essential terms you will include in the glossary mixer. As you would with any other skill-based instruction, make sure you gradually release the responsibility to the students so they are prepared. You may choose to release individual pieces through a process of I do, we do, to do, you do, or model the whole process all the way through. To begin, you will want a set of note cards with the writing mode written on each card. A list of possible modes might include science report, narrative essay, newspaper article, blog post, novel, argumentative essay introduction, rule book, Facebook status update, email, formal letter of complaint, wiki entry, text, chat, pamphlet, sales ad, menu, book jacket summary, comic, graphic novel, PowerPoint presentation, script. Make sure that there is at least one note card per student. If you use this list or pare down from the list, there will be repeats if you have a class the size of 35. This can lead to a nice discussion at the end of the activity as students can compare their similar modes as well as the different modes. Pass out the cards or have students pick a card from the pile and give students the term they will be working on, one term at a time. Having the definition of the term visible will ensure that all students can have success. You can accomplish this by projecting the definitions or giving students the definitions on a handout. Give yourself a term and a card and model how to create a sentence in the correct mode. Students then follow with their mode and term. Step 2 is simple. Students take a new writing mode card and start writing in that mode. Here's an example for step 1 using email. Hi Jenny. Sorry I had to crop you out of the photo. You had a big stain on your shirt from spilling cranberry juice. Example in step 2. Persuasive. Jenny, you would have been mad if you had been included in the picture. You had a red stain all over your shirt, so I cropped you out. We still included the word crop, but the writing approach is much different. Sample discussion. In the email example, I really just needed to explain why I did it, so it was just factual. However, I had to change my tone and word choice when I actually had to convince Jenny that she wanted me to crop her out. Now it's time for the students to interact with the language. Students choose which mode they want to expand upon and can show their deep understanding of the vocabulary. Notice how for platforms or modes like Twitter, there is a strategy to make sure students are able to keep expanding their understanding of the vocabulary. A sample Twitter expansion is provided on the next slide because it is such a popular mode for students. When you choose to use modes like Twitter that require shorter responses, it is important to adjust the expectation so all students are held accountable. Explain how and why the writing is more loose. Differentiation will be discussed in another slide, but this is a great place to differentiate product and/or process by guiding students to a mode that hits the student at their challenge level. When time permits, this is a perfect closing activity to highlight successes and assess how student understanding of the vocabulary is developing. Students can rotate around and pair share. You can call on students or read aloud or project, or you can use a combination of both. These sample slides are provided to show how the Glossary Mixer sentences might look in each content area and to show examples of the products of various writing modes. They are all listed in your viewing guide. Here's a newspaper article. And a rulebook, playbook. And a formal letter of complaint. One of the essential aspects of learning new strategies is having the opportunity to experience what your students will experience. Take a moment and complete the activity on the slide. Pay close attention to your thoughts and how your brain shifts gears when switching from mode to mode. It is that shift that makes this strategy so effective. Students are able to actively manipulate and build alternative paths in their brain to access the vocabulary. And have you thought about your audience? The people reading your sales ad, menu, graphic novel, or tweet? Glossary Mixer also allows for several types of differentiation. As mentioned earlier, selecting or guiding students to different writing modes can help students work in the zone of proximal development or instructional level. Next, we'll focus on English language learners, high achievers, and students with special needs. English learners access content and acquire English better when they're able to interact in meaningful ways and learn how English works. Using glossary mixers helps English learners interact with the word in several different contexts, which will help students' comprehension and learning throughout the unit. Taking the students' products and creating a word wall will provide scaffolds throughout the unit that English learners and all students can access. Working with partners when creating the full paragraph allows the English learners to practice orally in a low-stakes environment before putting pen to paper. English learners also learn how English works with the discussion on how the different writing modes produce different writing products. Providing sentence frames for the interactions may be another scaffold you can add to the strategy. The Glossary Mixer strategy can also help high achievers work in their instructional zone or ZPD. The long list of writing modes allows for many different processes to be occurring simultaneously in your classroom. You can use this to guide your high-achieving students to modes that are odd-fitting to challenge them. Comparing the strengths and weaknesses is on the analyzing level of Bloom's taxonomy, so students are getting to quite a high level of thinking on what could have been just another rote memorization day. The typical accommodations for students with special needs can easily be inserted into the Glossary Mixer strategy. Focusing the discussion on different writing modes specifically on audiences will help keep the discussion focused. Additionally, limiting the choices of modes to ones you know your students can be successful with is a strong differentiation practice. Be sure to stretch them as they become more comfortable with the process, providing support as needed. Take a moment and list how you would differentiate this activity in your class based on your students. Effective vocabulary instruction is perhaps the most important component of content area instruction. Glossary Mixer is a strategy with strong structures which compel the student to interact with the key vocabulary while supporting student thinking and writing. Strong writers are strong thinkers, and this strategy builds student capacity in both. Students will recall the vocabulary with more success and gain writing skills. What have you discovered today that will change your teaching practice? How will you fuse the Glossary Mixer strategy with instruction? Again, one of the essential aspects of learning new strategies is having the opportunity to experience what your students will experience. We hope that you have a new sense of empathy for when your students come in cold to a new unit and the challenge of learning a new vocabulary list. This final reflection will help you build such empathy while practicing the Glossary Mixer strategy. Choose a standard that you will teach in the next year. Which 10 vocabulary words will students need to know? Which vocabulary words either pose the biggest challenge or are most critical to understand for your students? Which 3 modes will best help you teach the standard? How will you model each mode? Choose one mode that you'd like to expand. In your mode, write one sample paragraph with at least 4 of your vocabulary words. Please pause the video for a moment and take a few minutes to follow the Glossary Mixer steps and draft your paragraph. Press play when you're finished. That brings us to the end of our webinar. Please take a moment to fill out our brief survey by visiting the link provided. Thank you for learning with us today.